This is just a short instructional video to show you how to install your commercial Studio SPINPower Crank onto your Precor commercial spinning bike. Everything that we're going to talk about today is located in your instruction manual here, your owner's manual. The tools you'll need are the crank, obviously, an 8mm Allen key that comes with most Precor commercial spinner bikes, a crank removal tool. This is the SpinTech crank removal tool, but others will do. This 21mm wrench goes with this, so you'll need the appropriate wrench. And I like to use some SpinTech equipment grease. You could also use some 3-in-1 oil. Let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do is to set the bike up so that we can reach all the components. First, put the pedal in an orientation to where you can reach the back side, as we're going to take the pedal off first. Next, tighten the resistance knob so that doesn't move. Now we're ready to take off the pedal. The first thing we do to remove the pedal is to remove the pedal bolt. Put your 8mm wrench into the bolt and turn. This should come out rather easily. Keep this aside. Make sure that you keep this oriented with the pedal. The next thing is to remove the pedal, we'll use our crank removal tool. Before we do anything, make sure that this tip is all the way flush with the body of the tool. So we unscrew it like this, so it's flush. Now it's ready to go into the back of the crank. Using just your fingers, make absolutely sure that this tool is lined up and goes into the hole. Screw it in until it bottoms out. Now you're ready to extract the pedal. This bolt can be hand turned until you feel a little resistance. In this case, it's a 21mm wrench. Tighten that up, holding the crank arm with the other arm. Keep going. It might be a little tricky here. It looks like the pedal has come out. And as you can see, wiggle the pedal, and the pedal is out. The next thing we'll do is to remove the tool. Loosen this just a bit, and it should come out by hand. Get ready for the next operation. Make sure that that tip is down at the end of the body. Now we're ready to get out the crank. Now we're going to remove the crank. The first thing that we need to do is to remove the crank bolt. Just like we did with the pedal, 8mm Allen key, hold the crank and loosen that bolt. It should come out relatively easily. Make sure you hang on to this, or you can use the new bolt that comes with the crank as well. Next, we take our crank removal tool. Again, the end has been screwed down so that it's flush with the edge of the body, and we insert this directly into the threads in the crank. Make sure this is going in absolutely straight, not to the side, not up, not down, but straight in. Might catch the first couple of threads. This one's screwing in by hand pretty easily until it bottoms out. That tool is all the way in now. You can see just by a couple of the threads exposed. Now it's time to remove the crank. Screw the bolt in by hand until you feel it bottom out. There it is. Now use your wrench holding the crank and tighten. You will feel some resistance here. Sometimes it's very difficult. You might need a little bit of elbow grease here. As soon as you start to feel the crank come loose, hold still. Now we'll remove this tool. Better to do it now before the crank comes off. and wiggle, and voila. While this is off, note that there is a keyway here. You can see that little indentation. Keep note of it. There's also a pin that's in the crank. Sometimes that gets lodged in the crank. Make sure not to lose that because we'll be putting that back in. Now it's time to put the SPINPower crank on the bike. First thing that we do is that we'll want to put a little bit of lubricant in here just for next time to keep that nice and rust-free. So just grab just a dollop, rub it on the inside surface, just like so. Wipe off the excess. If you haven't done so already, make sure that that pin is in place. It's very important. You can even put a little bit of material on the end piece as well. Now, being really careful, lining that up, slide the crank on, give it a little hit, grab that crank bolt that you took off in the first place or the one that comes with the crank, hand tighten, now when it comes to tightening this, we recommend that you use a torque wrench, and it should be tightened down to 35 to 40 foot-pounds. I'm just going to do this by hand until it feels relatively tight, and then I'll check it with the torque wrench. Now we're going to install the pedal. This is a Morse taper fitting, much like the crank. And what we're going to do is coat a little bit of grease on here to make it just a little easier. So just like we did with the crank, you can put a little grease on this surface. You can put a little inside the crank itself. And now gently make sure that's lined up and push it in. Give it a little tap with your hand. Now, using the bolt that you took out in the first place, hand tighten, and then wrench tighten the pedal. You'll see as we tighten it, it starts to draw that pedal into the crank. Again, that's relatively tight, but I'm going to check it with a torque wrench. Again, 35 to 40 foot-pounds. The last step we're going to take is just to wipe everything down to keep it nice and clean. So wipe off that excess grease that we had here in the pedal, and maybe a little bit of extra grease that came in to the bottom bracket, and you're finished.